I would like to ask you about how did you decide researching in environmental psychology?
Well, actually, I didn't make that as a conscious decision. As I remember, if I remember correctly, it was about 1958, which is almost half a century ago, that I was approached by the Veterans Department in Washington, and they were about to start a program of building mental hospitals for returning soldiers. And they were interested in finding somebody who could, well, they thought, use principles of perception, which was the field I was working in helping design a hospital. There was only one work at that time written on specifically the design of mental hospitals, and my memory for names is gone, so I can't remember the name, but it was on design of mental hospitals. So I said, fine, I would do that. And when I started looking into the literature, I discovered there wasn't any literature, really, and that it was a much bigger problem than just perception, just how you saw the rooms. And I looked around, and there really wasn't much work to rely on. So sort of gradually, as I got in the field and we started doing, I decided we needed some empirical data, so we started doing some research in mental hospitals, or in hospitals in general. And one of the things we did was try to, what we later called behavioral mapping. We tried to see how people related to the physical environment. And as I say, it became clear that there was a much bigger problem than we thought it was to start off with. So I talked to a colleague of mine there, Harold Prashansky, and he was a social psychologist, and he was interested. So we decided that we really had a new field here that nobody was working in. That there was some work, Ned Hall had written, he's an anthropologist, he'd written something. Personal space, Bob Summers had written on, and I can't remember the architect's name, but he'd written on the design of cities and the way people perceive cities.
Lynch. Lynch?
Lynch, that's right, Lynch. But so there was scattered work around, but no systematic approach. So we decided we really had a new field here, and we were going to see what we could do. So we started, working, and we actually taught a graduate class in, I don't remember what we called it then, but anyway, over the next 3 or 4 or 5 years, we started developing what we realized was a new field, and we didn't even know what to call it. And we, it was all the guy in Salt Lake City. I've lost his name too. He talked about architectural psychology. I can't remember his name. And anyway, after trying a lot of different names, we finally hit on the term environmental psychology. So we were the first people that I know of to use that word, environmental psychology. Although a German friend of mine, Karl Grumman, of course found a German who had used the term in 1920, but there's always a German who did it before anybody else. But other than that, that term had never been used before. So we really consciously decided we'd try to develop a new field, which we'd call environmental psychology. And in the middle 1960s, the City University of New York was formed. We were at that time at Brooklyn College, which was an independent college. But then, the middle 60s, the City University of New York was formed, putting all the colleges that were in New York together into a one university framework, and they built a graduate center for graduate work. At that time it was on 42nd Street in New York. So we moved in there, and we moved in with a department, or it wasn't called a department, a specialization in environmental psychology. And Hal Prashansky and Lee Rivlin at that time, and I, and later on Susan Sagert and Gary Winkle, put together a program at the City University of New York. And we're very proud that we put out, in 1970, published the first book entitled Environmental Psychology.
Bill, how do you decide between environmental psychology and maybe milieu psychology? Milieu?
Milieu.
Or, do you know? I don't know the difference exactly.
Well, we tried a great number of names. I forget them all now. I remember I gave a talk, I forget where it was, I think it might have been in Berkeley, at which I listed all the various terms that had been used: architectural psychology,
Ecological psychology.
ecological,
Yeah.
I forget all the others. And we had to pick a name, and we picked environmental. It might be also, it was strongly influenced by the fact that right around the late 60s and 1970, the environment was becoming important, and Congress passed the Environmental Quality Act, and the first Earth Day was held, I think it was 1970.
Yeah.
So that seemed like a good term.
Yeah, I can see.
So 61, 62, I was in Japan, and then came back in 63, went back on. So that influenced me a great deal. And if you, not so much now, but in those days, by 60, Japan was still, in many places, the old Japan. If you got into the country, you still ran into traditional Japanese architecture, farmhouses, way of dressing, way of living, everything. And that influenced me a great deal in my thinking. And the general Japanese attitude toward, I don't know if the environment's the right word, but toward their surroundings. And I really don't know how much of this is still true, because the world's becoming homogenized. But back then it was still true that the Japanese expressed their great interest in the beauty of the surroundings, and everything had to be just nicely done. I remember I was so impressed. My son, who was 12 years old at the time, had a birthday party, and we gave a party for all his friends, mostly Japanese, and went to the store to buy little gifts to give to the kids. Nothing expensive, in fact cheap. But every gift was wrapped meticulously so it looked beautiful. And you couldn't leave the store unless they did that. They wouldn't let you go unless you went out with a parcel that looked just beautiful. I don't think that exists anymore anywhere in the world.
Mm-hmm. How do you think about the philosophy of the EDRA?
Of EDRA?
Yeah.
Well, I think EDRA has been a great contribution to the field, and Bob and I and others were involved in the beginning of it, and it still draws a lot of people from a lot of different areas and internationally too. So by and large, I think it's been a great contribution. On the negative side, EDRA has partially reflected, and partially from the start, was most interested, I think, in applied problems. And if you look at EDRA and the history of environmental psychology, my own feeling is that it's unfortunate that we've been so emphasized applied problems to the lack of any really consistent theory. There are lots of little theories, but there really hasn't developed a full-scale theory of environmental psychology. And that should, and my fond hope, which hasn't been realized 50 years ago, was that environmental psychology would be sort of the framework on which a lot of psychology would be pinned, because actually all of psychology is dealing with the environment. Unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, but the direction, well, unfortunately for environmental psychology, what's happened now is all of psychology is being pinned to the brain, which is all right, but it leaves out a big chunk of psychology, I think.
Yeah.
So this is going beyond EDRA.
Well, I don't know if you decide to come to Tucson, to University of Arizona.
My wife was raised in New Mexico, and she introduced me to the Southwest right after we were married in 1946, and I liked the Southwest. But we were both on the East Coast at that time, and I was just starting graduate work at Princeton. But we both decided we wanted to go back to the Southwest. And that I promised my wife that we'd go to the Southwest the first time a real opportunity arose. Well, like most promises, it wasn't really kept. And 30 years later, we were still saying we've got to move to the Southwest. So that's the personal background. Okay. I was corresponding with a man by the name of Lawrence Wheeler, who at that time had just become head of the department here in Arizona. And he was interested in environmental psychology. And he and Terry Daniel, I don't know, I guess he was here before Terry, I just don't remember that. But he and Terry were the only two people here who were doing any work like that. And they both decided they wanted to build up some environmental psychology here. So I got a letter from Wheeler asking me if I could recommend somebody for the department. And I recommended myself because it sounded interesting. It was building up an new environmental program. It was in the Southwest, so promises could be kept. And the combination brought me here. Then Bob was interested in coming here, so I immediately got them to hire Bob. So then we had, 4 people who were working in the field, and it was, that's enough in a small department. So we had a really nice group here of about 4 people in psychology and 4 people in other departments. There was another person, but anyway, we had landscape architecture and geography and anthropology. So we started out here in 1975, 76 with a really nice group, cross-discipline group. And for a few years, we had a really, really nice program going here. For a variety of reasons, we weren't able to keep it going. And the people who were in that program look back at it fondly as one of the great times of their life. I mean, the students who were in it look back on it, and we do too. One of the reasons we couldn't keep it up was the lack of funds. that was right about the time that the federal government turned
Budget.
conservative, and there wasn't any money. We tried all sorts of things, and it was just very hard to get research money, except on very specific applied problems. I mean, pushing environmental, and we couldn't support any claim with any outside money, and also that was the period during which universities became increasingly dependent on outside financing, and that trend has been going on ever since. And as you well know, or maybe you don't know, but in this country at least, the universities go where the money is now.
So is the money from the government only?
Mostly government money, although more and more it's going toward private
enterprises?
money too. Yeah.
Oh.
For research in the areas that they're interested in.
Yeah.
So money and politics are increasingly, this is cynical of me, but I'm afraid it's true, money and politics are increasingly driving the direction in which higher education and higher research is going.
Oh. Yeah.
So that's the long story on the history of environment, of why I came to Arizona.